Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scary Stories We Tell. I am one of your hosts, Chris Stashew.
And I'm here too. I'm Emma.
We're the hosts of this show, most of the time, sometimes, who knows? But we're definitely the hosts of this series that we do on Scary Stories We Tell, which is SurrealTube, where we take a look at things on the internet that are strange. Videos on the internet that are strange or surreal, or hey, just worth checking out. And we've been stuck with three weirdos in a house together. And boy, it's gotten weird in the last 6 episodes. I guess 5 episodes now. And now we're at the finale here. I guess how many of these have we done now?
So we split up the original series into what, 3 or 4 episodes?
I think it was 3 episodes.
And then we've split these up episodically.
Right. This is the 9th time we're talking about Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared.
I hope it's not the last.
I hope so as well, but it is the end of the first season of the show, which you can totally pick up over on the internet, over at, I believe, A4, Channel 4 on the internet, which is a British streaming service. But if you want to follow along, which you totally should be, that's where you can find this show, because this is the final time we're going to be covering this until there's more to cover, because this is the final episode of the first season of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, aptly titled Electricity. So we open this episode a little differently than we've opened the other ones because, well, Emma, we see a human being.
This is like, other than, I guess, the foreshadowing from the previous episode, this is the first time we have really seen human intervention aside from just like the gags of, oh, they're puppets. Oh, they're being controlled by somebody. Oh, red guy's getting into a suit. Like they have this little split second, like, oh, there are humans in this universe, or this is a show, like meta moment. But this is the first time we've seen a human as a character.
Right.
Like affecting the universe. So we were questioning how the episode was going to start in our last episode of this. Because where we left our trio was a garbage dump.
Best we could tell.
Which is really easy to forget after watching this episode. But that after their road trip, they ended up in presumably a garbage dump. And we were questioning, you know, is the show going to start right back where it started before, always in the house? There was like weird foreshadowing. It was either that or they were going to start still like, you know, in this like weird meta version of their world, the exterior of said house. But we didn't. We started almost back at square one.
Well, and we see the house, and the house is spinning in a circle, and it's like one of those old pieces of animation where it has a strip of film on the inside, and you spin it really fast, and by looking through the slit, you can see the picture moving. I believe that's called a zoetrope, actually. And that's what it feels like they're going for, and I feel like by the end of the episode, that is more or less confirmed as what's going on. Because in a lot of ways, I think the show more or less says what we are seeing is being played out and controlled by somebody else.
Right.
But that person is not in our level of reality. They're one level into the show. But the show exists one further level of reality in from that person. But somehow that person and the show are able to interact in a way that we are unable to interact with the show. They're able to directly interact with the characters in the show. And we see the kind of seeds of that being played out at the beginning when you see the house as a zoetrope.
Right. The first imagery that like I was getting with the spinning of the house, because I didn't immediately see it as that like animation thing. I immediately saw it as like cyclical nature going back in time. That's how my brain interpreted it. So like a reset, like or rewinding, right. Almost. That was more so of what the imagery invoked for me personally. But I think both can be true.
Well, I mean, a zoetrope, I mean, if you think about what a zoetrope does, if you start at one point and you go in a circle, you start right back at where you were. So it completely just leans directly into what you're talking about. And I mean, again, the journey always ends up back at home is the way the episode that we just watched ended.
Right.
And we open this with the journey always ends up back at home, and they're there. And to be fair, we did last see them in the wasteland together, but we did see a human hand pushing their car back to the house.
Right.
So again, that's clearly now a indicator that what we should have interpreted the end of the last episode is as whoever this is resetting everything intentionally. And
Right.
like you said, be it a zoetrope, be it the circularness of the narrative, everything happens every time the same way because at the end, they always end up in the same spot, which I think is an interesting kind of commentary on sitcoms. Because again, like The Simpsons or Family Guy or, Two and a Half Men or The Office or so many shows start at one point, that you go on a journey and then you're right back at the same spot that you started and no progress has been made in the narrative.
Growth.
It's just, yeah. And, again, it's interesting to see the show take that to task directly because it's kind of an esoteric idea and it's not necessarily the easiest to try to convey to an audience without saying, well, in this show, this is what happened. It's a little harder to get that across to an audience without being able to point directly at it happening in another show.
Right. The way I always see those types of shows that reset like that is that the characters aren't the story, they're the medium.
Right.
And I think that is so clear and very in line with everything we've seen thus far. Everything with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. It's very much like this is our trio, sure, but we don't know anything about them and it doesn't really matter. There is no arc, there is no progress, there is no I learned something and that carries over. I guess with some sitcoms, you do eventually see like if it goes on long enough, you see them grow. And so you sort of, at that point, the producers have to write in some kind of overarching story if it extends longer than they anticipate. But for the most part, at least with animation, the characters stay the same because that is the best way for the writers to tell a story is with, these pieces as the medium as they are. And if they change, that changes how the story would be portrayed. And they have these different mini stories they want to tell utilizing these characters as that artistic medium, nothing more, nothing less.
And I think it's an interesting commentary on that in this show. I don't know how successfully it's being received by the audience because I think it's a pretty high level concept that requires you to have prior knowledge of these storytelling conventions. I mean, again, it doesn't harm my enjoyment of this if I wouldn't have known that. But to be fair, I feel like if you're not just stumbling upon this show. This isn't just on your local cable network. You had to go out of your way to find this. And so I feel like, as someone who watches a lot of things, as I know you do, it is being received the way it was intended by me, by them, at least. At least I interpret it that way.
I think so. But I think the next big thing to point out is that we don't even get an intro song. It's not even about the three of them.
Yeah, it's, to open it with this zoetrope house in this attic of a building that we don't realize is the house that they've been in this whole time.
Not to mention the stained glass.
Right. It's interesting because in a lot of ways, it feels very reverential. Like there's a sense of religiosity to these characters that we haven't really seen up until this point. And I'm not saying like they're being, prayed to, but they're being presented in the beginning of the show as like seemingly spiritual beings or a little bit more than just puppets, because we're seeing them enshrined in the stained glass. Then we see later in the episode, we see that there are kind of these weird artifacts that are almost specific to each character even. So it's interesting because it feels like, again, there is something going on here that there is more going on here. And I think we talked about this in the last episode, hey, if there is something going on here, are they going to let the cat out of the bag at some point? And I think they kind of 1/3, 2/3 did. I think there is still more going on, but they make it very clear very quickly into this episode that there is more going on here by showing you this hand cranking the house right at the opening. And I think it's very smart. I think it's very smart.
So from there, obviously, we immediately are going back into, them being in the house. They're having shenanigans. They mention, like, oh, I'm doing a crossword, like all the mundane stuff, until they mention just like the one thing that triggers a teacher to come into the scene and start teaching them something, which, by the way, that electricity song slaps.
It's pretty good.
The electric guitar portion, I wasn't expecting. It makes a lot of sense. I'm really glad they did it. I think it was great. I think it was necessary. I didn't know it was necessary until they did it.
I totally agree. I really liked that song. And not every song in the show has been a song that you could theoretically listen to outside of the show. I'm not sure that there have been any songs that you could listen to outside of the show, really.
Right.
But this one hews closer to a traditional song, quote unquote.
I would also say that this teacher feels the most genuine of all the teachers.
Yes.
To me personally, like there's no hidden agenda. There's no tricking.
Best
like
we can tell.
This character who I guess is supposed to be the electronic components of like a fuse box. Is that what that was supposed to be?
The character is named Electracy, but yeah, it's a robot that has sockets for feet.
The name Electracy did not stick in my brain. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that because that went completely over my head.
They didn't do a very good job of giving that name away in this episode.
That really enhances it for me.
It's a pretty good name. But I guess it is just the components of a fuse box.
Right.
But they have batteries in their chest that power them.
But I also will say something that I noticed early in the episode is that the characters seemed even more upset with the teacher early on than usual. Like usually the teacher at first is like intrusive and they're a little off put. But this time it felt like they were like actively trying to like write off the teacher. Like she comes in and she's like electricity and they're like, so
right,
why does it matter? That's stupid. And like I think that's the first time there was no curiosity. Like they've definitely been put off by the teachers before, but they engaged with the teachers regardless, whether they really wanted to or not. But this was the first time where it seemed like they were very anti-interaction at the start. And then obviously the song came on and then, I mean, they were hooked with the electric guitars. Who wouldn't be? But I did find that interesting.
Yeah. I feel like, we mentioned, this is a sitcom and the characters aren't making any meaningful progression, but I feel like them being frustrated with the teacher is a step towards the characters growing. Because I feel like the more these characters keep intruding, the more our characters are being annoyed by them.
Right.
But it is weird that this one is so endearing in the way that like they normally aren't.
This is the least upsetting teacher I think we've ever had, in my opinion.
For sure. I agree 100%.
At no point did she ever do anything that was like actually weird?
I mean, after she gets her batteries swapped with Yellow Guy's batteries, who apparently has batteries, even though he's a human being, supposedly, maybe. She starts acting weird.
They killed the hamster or whatever.
Yeah, but the hamster was a robot.
I think, with guts.
Maybe. Like they say maybe.
They had to have one like real gore element. I mean, they have another one like later on, but like they had to have like one gore element early on. But again, it wasn't that weird. The moment she was like, well, actually, there are wires in here. I actually thought that was really funny.
I don't know if that's another kind of hint at this being an unreality.
Right.
That's kind of what I interpreted it as, was like, it's a hint at this being an unreality of sorts, but also like, I'm never going to say no to some puppet gore. Like you don't get that very often.
No,
this show you
it.
do. It's great. They do it about as well as anybody else ever has. So,
right.
But I guess Yellow Guy has batteries and the electrical box has batteries. And so they get the bright idea to swap Yellow Guy's old batteries for Electracy's new batteries, which I guess was what Yellow Guy was missing this whole time.
And so this is the interesting part. And I feel like this analogy, this metaphor was pretty clear. This was Yellow Guy's enlightenment.
Yeah. I mean, they do the whole 2001 Space Odyssey thing where he's traveling through the corridor of light and all of a sudden he's like, where have I been this whole time? It's very Homer Simpson having a crayon removed from his brain. And all of a sudden he's the smartest man in the world. Like
they did that with like Patrick Star and fucking SpongeBob. They had like a coral head episode and he like got a new brain or whatever.
Right. Like anytime you have a character that's, quote, written as a moron in a show, you should always have, or can always have, or do always have a episode where they become smart for an episode, but they never stay that way.
Especially smarter than everyone else, to the point where everybody else hates them for it.
Right. And notices it. And they're like, oh my God, he gets, again, if Yellow Guy were just average stupid the way Duck and Red Guy are, because Duck and Red Guy aren't smart, they're just less stupid than Yellow Guy is.
Right.
If he were just as stupid as they are, but no stupider, they would not notice. But because he's like a complete genius to their, at least, beliefs. And again, he does seem smart. He doesn't seem like... He knows
what a tariff is.
Yeah. He's inventing words per Duck.
I can invent words too.
Yeah, I do think all of that interplay between Yellow Guy and Duck and Red Guy, when Yellow Guy is now, again, seemingly smarter than he was before, I think it's all very smart and very funny. And it kind of takes this character who has kind of gotten a little stagnant as a character. I mean, he's kind of been a little one note as a character, and it does something different with him in a really substantive way. Again, we'll get to it here in a second, but like whether or not they do anything interesting with it remains to be seen. But I like that we get to see a version of Yellow Guy who is smart, or very smart, unquote.
Right. So from there, I mean, and again, I think we need to keep in mind, at least in our theories, Yellow Guy to us has been the stand-in for the child audience, right?
The perceived audience of a show like this.
Right. The intended audience. Yeah.
Right.
And obviously realizing that he is too smart for this quote unquote show, obviously he doesn't realize it's a show at this point, is when he makes the ascent. There is a lot of Enlightenment imagery, obviously, like walking up the stairs.
Right. A lot of symbolism. Like, and it's heavy-handed symbolism.
But like in a good way. I didn't mind it. I really didn't mind it.
I mean, with a show like this, you have to be heavy with it, because you can't just turn to the audience and spell it out, because they're already doing that already.
Right. So making his way up the stairs, he finds the big boy room. Oh. How do you feel about the big boy room?
So there's a version of Red Guy that is huge, and there is a version of Duck that is huge, and they have really long distended arms, and they're sitting there in a room where they learn everything twice. So they learn two things at the same time. But it's two different things. They're not learning like two complementary things. They're learning about rocks and boundaries. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I mean, I think it's a little heavy-handed, but again, I think with a show like this where you have to do so much visually to really get the point across, I think, look, we've always commented on this show's ability to navigate changing the mediums, and to have it changed into these gigantic puppets that are a joy to look at, because they look like Sesame Street characters. They look like... Oh,
I hated looking at them.
Big Bird and Snuffleupagus, but like the demented versions of them. And I mean, that's what Red Guy... I mean, I'm actually shocked that we've never said Red Guy is Big Bird, or Red Guy is Snuffleupagus, and Duck is Big Bird. And fucking the Yellow Guy is Bert or Ernie.
Oh, I was going to say Elmo.
Or Elmo. I mean, Elmo is, Elmo's the child of Sesame Street.
Right.
But they're like the perverse versions of those. But then we see in this room versions of them closer to the versions that we're talking about, where Duck kind of looks like Big Bird and Red Guy kind of looks like Snuffleupagus, like more so than they do already.
Which is supposed to be... I mean, obviously, the big boys room is supposed, in my opinion, represents the next level up in terms of children's programming. Like, you have the quote unquote baby shit, and then you have, like the little Einsteins, I think this step up.
I think it goes even further. I think, but again, like, I don't know how much further they need to go, because like, they don't really comment on like entertainment for teenagers, because I think that's what they're going for, right?
Well, I think, like I said, I think the rooms, I think it's also important to note that in the big boys room, Yellow Guy also for a split second sees the puppet masters in their like morph suits blending into the wall. And like for a second, he has that like meta moment where I don't think anybody in the show has recognized that there was human intervention at any point. This was like that quick, like little meta peeling back, you know, the layer, looking through the fourth wall type thing. That's like, I think the first time that a character hasn't noticed that. So it's fitting, you know, during Yellow Guy's ascent into enlightenment, as it were, that he were to notice, you know, what we have been noticing. And I guess it's almost supposed to say that like he is achieving the same level of understanding as we are. And now we are on his level, or he is now on our level, because we're also still confused about what the fuck the show's about, but we understand that it's a show. And I think he is now at that level of us, at least at this point. But the way that, you know, these two conflicting lessons are being taught is too much for him. It's overwhelming, not because it's too smart for him, but because it's just too noisy and too it was overstimulating. So he goes up another flight for the bigger boys' room.
I do want to mention, I think it's interesting that they do have this meta moment of seeing people controlling the teacher. Only because, again, like if we're operating that the show is a sub-reality of ours, and then the show within the show that the characters exist within is a sub-reality of that reality, but a sub-reality of our own.
Right.
The characters are seeing, the character of Yellow Guy is seeing the sub-reality or our reality. He's seeing the sub-reality of the show, right? Because there's a show in the show. Somebody's making the show Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared within a reality that is one removed from our own. Okay. So I guess it's interesting that they do that because they haven't done it before and they don't do it again.
They didn't even do that in the original series.
Right. So, and there are some things that happen in this episode that are open-ended questions that could be answered. This is one of them because Yellow Guy sees him for a split second and then he just kind of disregards it and leaves. And I am curious if that will be a reoccurring theme at some point if the show comes back, because you showed us, the audience, that too. So it's intentional, but it was so strange because we were both like, oh, holy shit. Like, there you go. Like in broad daylight. Cause we talked about it in the last episode where they're changing, but it's like during a quote fast forward moment in the show. So we're not actually seeing it, but here it's like, yeah, Yellow Guy is shocked at seeing real people.
The way that they framed it is very much supposed to be a realization. And I think he has another crisis. I mean, the whole time during this, he is starting to question his reality, or I suppose his unreality. And that is just another like quick layer of that in and of itself. I mean, he's starting to realize how weird the world around him actually is. How could this all be possible? And so the moment that he questions that, or truly questions that, is the moment that he sees what is happening behind the scenes, if only briefly. And I think in a way he might be shutting himself off to it, which could also be why he left the room.
Well, and what I wonder is it that he's just not seeing it because he's not focusing on it and they're always there? Or is by taking these batteries in, he's able to see them? Because that's what I'm wondering, because it's more interesting if they're there all the time and it's just, you know, out of your peripheral, you're not seeing it, but they are there. I would find that more interesting than, oh, you're changing something about yourself and you're able to see one reality above where you are.
I think what it's saying is that they are always there, but it's not that they're out of our peripheral. It's that they cannot perceive them. And because they can't perceive them, we are not supposed to perceive them.
Like ghosts.
Sure.
Well, I mean, again, but the interesting thing is the way that they show them is not, if they had shown them in green screen suits, I don't think I would have as many questions, but they show them in, like you said, black morph suits with the white letters on them, as
to
if
blend
they're
into the wall,
as if they're always there.
Which, I mean, to me, that is like the equivalent of they are blending into the background. You don't see it unless you are looking directly at it or looking for it. And if you don't know to look for it, you will not be able to see it.
Right.
And I think that's what happens in that moment, is that because he makes that very direct question of like, I am questioning my own reality, he is able to look directly at it, see it for what it is, and then ultimately shut himself off to it. Because, I mean, if you notice something like that, I think you'd want a while to process it too.
Well, it's like magicians who make cards levitate, right? I mean, they're making the card levitate with something on the card. You just can't see it if you don't know what you're looking for. And they'll do all the tricks and things to show you there's nothing above and beneath and around the card. But again, like this is not on the level. I like that that's where this is going, is that there is something else going on that they just can't perceive. It's not that they have to do something else and then they see it. It's just they're not able to perceive it, but it is there. I like that conceit of the show because it's a much smarter conceit than, oh, he changed his batteries and now he can see everything. It's like, that's not entirely it.
No, it's that because of his enlightenment, because of the batteries, he is able to ask those questions. I mean, it's all about the enlightenment period. You know, I think, therefore I am, all of the philosophies. As we said, it's pretty heavy-handed, but it's like becoming aware of your own consciousness, of your own place in this world, of your own sentience, and what that means. And is there something pulling the strings? Which obviously in this world, we already knew this. There is something pulling the strings. This is not just, you know, this character, like these characters in this world that everything just happens to be plush and we just accept that. They are puppets. We know in the context of the show, they are meant to be puppets. Not just in the context of the show, they are meant to be characters. They are meant to be puppets. They are manipulated. We know that. We know that this show is a commentary on shows and that is truthful within this reality. We just don't know what that actually means, what they're trying to say with that. That's the mystery we're still trying to unravel.
Yeah. Because again, like that, what does that interaction mean to the people that make this show? That the characters that have been created are interacting with the creators of the characters. Like, what are you trying to say about that? And it's an interesting conversation to have, the interplay between the creator and the creation. You know,
right?
I mean, it's, you know, with someone like, say, J.K. Rowling, you have the logical conclusion of that, where your creation is not as reviled as you are, but it's hard to separate the two. I mean, those are ways that creations and the creators interplay with one another. And it's a big kind of stumbling block for a lot of people in our day and age to figure out, where does that separation lie? And I think it's interesting that this show is kind of having a commentary on that, of like, where do the creator and the creation separate from one another, and what does it mean for them to interact? Mm-hmm. You know, and most of the time it's not literally, here the show is like, no, let's literally show you that. So right.
So okay, how'd you feel about Bigger Boy's room?
I feel like the gimmick went on for too long with them zapping the little thing, the little petri dish creation.
I agree. I didn't quite get the metaphor here. It was really clear to me with the last room. This room, I was like, is this supposed to be like, again, that next level up in children's programming? But I can't draw a comparison with it. Could you?
Yeah, I feel like it's a commentary, maybe less on children's programming, but more on kind of Discovery Channel programming, where you have people just going out and doing things just to go and do them. You know, we're going to go and pay these people to go and stand out in the woods for a month and scream at Bigfoot. Like, maybe it's that.
Was it supposed to be like Bill Nye, the science guy?
Well, that's why it kind of, what was running through my head was that quote from Jurassic Park that Ian Malcolm says, where it's like, you know, because you had the power to do it, you didn't stop and think if you should.
Just because we can doesn't mean we should. Yeah.
Right. And you have them like zapping this creature in a petri dish, and they're like, why are you doing that? It's like, well, it likes it, or it's, you know, and it's like, what? And they're just like sitting in there and zapping it just because. And I don't know what it's commentating on, other than just like, you know, if it's commentating on that kind of content, then there is something there. If it's commentating on people, I'm not sure what they're getting at specifically.
I think that was the weakest moment of the episode, was Bigger Boy's Room. Although I was very delighted by Bigger Boy's Room as a title.
Well, and I like the designs that they have with Duck and Red Guy in that room. To have Red Guy as like a giant floating crystal with drone eyes I thought was a pretty interesting design. And then Duck just looks like a Cybertronic nightmare.
Yeah. Like Science Theater or whatever the hell that thing's called.
Yeah. Oh, Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I honestly, like, each one of these episodes has had a weaker moment. And I think that moment with them in the bigger boys' room, I think is the weakest moment of this episode. And it goes on for like a minute too long.
Yeah. But during this time is when downstairs, back at the main level with our red guy and our duck, they are experimenting with electricity. Now that they know what electricity is, they've been like conjuring up and electrifying all of their stuff to the point where they blow a fuse. The teacher tries to warn them, but really struggles due to the rusted batteries, and everything goes dark. And then, as you said while we were watching it, Twin Peaks.
Right. Which I think I mentioned at the end of the first season of this, because they're in that room, I guess.
I mean, that's always been their tile floor. It's just that with obviously like with the dark background and like everything, like it evokes that different feeling when you strip everything else away.
Well, and Twin Peaks is a show that in its third season, it may have been having a commentary about how the creator and the creation interact with that show and the expectations of the audience. And that's a thing that David Lynch really played around with in that third season of Twin Peaks. So to say that in a lot of ways, this was, visually it has a Twin Peaks inspiration, this episode, I think it maybe to overlook the fact that this show has kind of been inspired by Twin Peaks, at least its ability and wanting to take the characters out of the narrative into a holding area where they're effectively interacting with our reality or some reality above their own in the narrative. Maybe not ours, but something that is above their own their own narrative reality. And this show is doing the exact same thing to the point where we're about to get effectively the show tacitly admitting that there is someone controlling everything. That is one reality beneath ours, but one reality above theirs.
So my question is, what is the symbolism of the teachers being dead and strewn across the floor?
I think they're just powered by electricity, right?
I guess so.
It's all the electricity powered ones that are dead, I guess, other than the suitcase, because there's the clock, there's the refrigerator.
They did see the piece of meat running. So I guess that tracks.
Because that's like a sentient piece of meat. I don't know. Again, maybe that's where they go when they're not being used. That's like the holding area for them when they're not, dancing around. I mean, that's as good an answer as any, right?
That reminds me of, you saw Inside, I'm sure, Bo Burnham.
Yeah.
That's how the world works with the sock. Like, I'm going to go back into a frightening liminal space between states of being.
Yeah. I mean, that was my interpretation, is that's where these creatures, these teachers are when they're not being used.
That makes sense.
They're dead, but at the end of the episode, we effectively see some of them back in place. We see the refrigerator back in place. We see the electrical box thing goes back in place. So it's not put right by the end of the episode. I mean, that would be my interpretation. Again, rather heavy-handed, but with a show like this, you kind of have to be.
But I will say, it's obviously in stark contrast to Yellow Guy's enlightenment. They are essentially put in the dark. I mean, where they understand even less, whereas Yellow Guy is beginning to understand more and more.
I think to the point where Red Guy and Duck are talking about how they can't even see one another because it's so dark.
And how they miss one another, which would be missing, looking at each other's faces, which was honestly quite touching. And I wasn't expecting that. For two characters that one of them is kind of abrasive to the point of repugnancy. Yeah. I mean, it was refreshing because those, I mean, again, you want to love these characters, even if they're kind of assholes. Yeah. Right. I feel I mean, Duck is kind of the most abrasive of the three, but he's still a lovable character. I mean, yeah, when he was singing about his shredder, that was quite delightful. And hugging it very closely. He loves the shredder. The very important shredder. Yeah, the titular. The titular shredder. I find it interesting that once Yellow Guy goes from the bigger boy's room to the attic, we have a real human being again. Let us talk about Leslie. Maybe a real human being. She had stitches. She looked like she had been sewn in areas. She was wearing a plush coat. We never got like a good look at her body, but we could tell from her face that she had plush like stitches. So she was definitely a real, person with, obviously in our world, prosthetics. I'm obviously, but in that world, what does that mean?
I think it means that actors are creations of someone else. So they had to show what a human being who's been created by someone would look like, literally. If you want to literally show them as a creation, you show them as a thing that's been stitched together. I think it was just to literally show that this is still a show. This is an unreality.
I'm wondering if, because you mentioned earlier that the attic, when they first, that opening scene, and you see the stained glass, is Leslie, in context of the show, is she God?
I think so. I think it's, again, that would say the room is reverential, but it also could double as heaven, right? At the top. Well, I mean, again, but then, we'll get to it when we get to it, but it's maybe not necessarily the top, but that would also make sense if this is a sub-reality of our own. I think she is the god of this world. She's the god of those three, for sure.
At the very least.
Right. To the point where we see her opening a drawer and taking a replacement of Duck out and putting it on the shelf. I feel like that's a pretty tacit admittance by the show that this character is in control of everything and has been this whole time.
And also these characters are easily replaceable, not sentient.
Right.
Or at least they shouldn't be.
And I will say, I think that this really only applies to this season of the show. I don't think anything that happened in the web series is canon anymore.
I don't think so either.
I think that was its own thing. And I think that they've left it behind. And I think that's for the better, because the story that they tell there is actually just this story again. It's actually just the same thing.
It's just the lore aspect of it is what they basically rewrote.
I think it works better here. If you compare the last episode of the first season, quote, of the show, the web series, and the first season of the television series, if you compare them, they're narratively similar, because they're talking about how does the creator interact with the creation? How does the creation interact with the creator? And they're asking the same questions, because we don't know. In that one, it's Red Guy who's out in the real world, maybe. And in this one, it's Yellow Guy interacting with the real world, maybe. I think it works better here because the lines and the rules are clearly defined thanks to the last 5 episodes of the show.
Right. They set up the premise better, for sure.
They've had however many years in between the web series
to
and
refine
the action.
it. Yeah.
Right. And I think this works better to say, okay, there's a human being who has been created by people in our universe who is then creating and controlling these 3 in that universe. That makes more sense and works better. If Roy was that stand-in, or Red Guy was the stand-in in the first web series of this show, it makes sense. But I don't think that these 2 things have anything to do with each other anymore. And I think that's for the best.
So back to Leslie, because she is quite fascinating. She comes off, obviously, as very sweet, very benevolent. And then she has those couple of moments where she breaks that, I don't want to say facade, but at first she tells Yellow Guy that he is one of her favorites. And then later on, doesn't she say something like, "You are not my son?
You're not my real son.
You're not my real son." That was interesting. So she got very angry during that. And I'm wondering if that has a deeper meaning. Is she a god of this world because she lost her children? That's where my brain went. Is this a grieving mother having a psychotic break and creating a children's show because she lost her own children? I don't know if that strengthens it or weakens it for me, but I would feel remiss if I did not mention that, because that's a very strange thing to say, unless if it was just for the sake of being off-putting and strange, which, if that's all it was, it did a great job.
No, I feel like there is some, because again, we've kind of talked about how Yellow Guy is this kind of child surrogate in the show. I think there has to be some validity to what you're saying. Again, right? At least that's the way the show presents it. I think, it's obvious why Yellow Guy is Leslie's favorite, because Yellow Guy is the most child facing of all of them, like a real human child. And so that innocence that the character can easily express is going to be more well received by a mother or maternal figure than two whiny and abrasive teenage slash
middle age.
Yeah, like again, those characters are immediately more abrasive than Yellow Guy. Yellow Guy is, his innocence allows him to be taken not as seriously.
I really wonder, because I haven't had a ton of time to really think about this because we only like just watched it, but I'm really wondering now, is all of this, you know, the creation of a grieving mother? I'm wondering that now. And that Leslie like wrote herself into the show as the benevolent, you know, godlike figure, or if it's all, you know, just a metaphor, a visual metaphor. I don't know, because she's obviously crafted because she has stitches. So we know that she's not real in the same sense that we are in the context of the show. She, as you said, somebody else had made her. And I'm wondering if the real Leslie made this fake Leslie. And like, that's like there's a true Leslie. I don't know if I'm going off the rails here, but I'm wondering if there is a true Leslie.
Well, there is another door in the attic.
Yes.
That goes up. So, but the question then becomes, is that staircase to our reality, or is there another reality in between our reality and that reality and the reality we're seeing, where it's a version of our reality that, you know, well, this is where the show was created and we created that character for the show. And now Yellow Guy is out in our world. And whatever that staircase is meant to represent him in our reality. Or is it a reality in between that one and this one? I would be inclined to believe it's probably supposed to be our reality.
That's where I'm leaning.
Because, again, I feel like if they did one more level of removal from our reality, then it just becomes like too fucking
It's a little too, I was going to say it's a little too convoluted at that point. I feel like this is enough. I feel like what they have established is in and of itself enough. And so I guess the last thing to really go over is the book. Yellow Guy, I mean, well, obviously Yellow Guy wants to know what the hell's going on. He wants answers. He's scared. He's confused.
And I think he would still want answers even if he wasn't super smart.
Yeah.
If he were put in that position, right? Like,
but he wouldn't have known to ask questions.
Right.
That's the thing. So Leslie agrees to answer his questions for him if he helps her straighten up the fake house, her little house diorama, which we can only assume is automatically like affects the real house.
Right.
That's the idea, is that whatever happens to the diorama happens to the whole house. And then I'm sure in the tiny diorama is another tiny diorama and another tiny diorama. Like, you know.
Well, and there is a scene where we see Yellow Guy walking up to this third level, and he looks to his right and he sees a picture of him with a picture of him on the wall, with a picture of him on the wall. And it made me think of The Matrix, the second film, where Neo goes into the architect's room and you see this panel of screens of Neo having a multitude of interactions, but all different reactions to the same question, showing that he's been in there a million times and he's done this a million times. And how do you think it's going to be any different? If it's happened a million times, you think 1,000,001 is going to be different. But the reason you do this is in the hope that 1,000,001 is different. And I wonder if this is the first time that this has happened, is more what I'm getting at.
That is a good question. Huh. I didn't think about that.
Because I feel like the things that they show us are so intentional that they're making us ask questions about the validity of the reality that we're seeing, and what is the reality that we're seeing, and what does that mean? And I think one of those things is you see things that would lead me to believe this maybe has happened before.
I suppose it's either that or just supposed to show that like how none of this is real. All of it is just a smaller version of it happening again, I suppose, but like simultaneously rather than in a timeline.
And was it always Yellow Guy? I mean, could it have been Duck? You know, I don't even remember. I would want to go back and watch now. Do we see the upstairs? Like, do we see see a place for them to go upstairs is my question.
maybe. Have we ever seen steps before, is what you're saying.
Right, because I don't remember, and I wonder if, like, by putting the batteries into Yellow Guy, if that was the catalyst for him seeing
stairs. Yeah.
I mean, more than likely, because you would assume that Red Guy and Duck would have gone up those stairs if they had seen them. What's this? I mean, like, you know, like, and gone and investigated. So I wonder if, like, to see the stairs was the first moment where he, like, is realizing that there's more going on, but he could not have seen them, similarly to not being able to see the people on the wall because it's just there in plain sight, but he's just ignoring it or missing it or not able to comprehend it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I mean, again, like, I don't know how deep the show goes. Like,
I mean, I think at this point we shouldn't question how deep the show goes.
Well, and the other question I have before, as we kind of get to the point where we're talking about this book, early in the episode, Yellow Guy is talking about how he's created a third language out of numbers and symbols, aka letters and numbers. And what he writes on the pad is the same thing that's on the cover of this book that supposedly holds all the answers to the show.
Right.
Apparently. So is that something that can be solved, and is there an answer? Or is this, again, just a troll by the creators to put one thing in and then, you know, foreshadow, plant, and payoff? I wonder. I'm sure someone on the internet has answered that question. We just didn't have the opportunity to look. But I like that there's this through line constantly of, you've been doing something that maybe you don't realize you've already done or already exists, or somebody else is doing it through you, is maybe even what it is.
Was it somebody planting the seed in a sense?
Right, could be, to try to get Yellow Guy to get the information to Red Guy and Duck that they're in an unreality. But again, to what end? Because it doesn't seem like Leslie has any sort of goal she's driving towards other than restarting the house. That's
what I was wondering, is what is Leslie's motivation? Which is why I'm starting to wonder if the true, like, lore behind this is that Leslie is a grieving mother. Because that would make sense to me. It, you know, unless if she's not supposed to make sense, which is fair, and I would accept that. If she is supposed to make sense, then what is her motive? And the only thing I can see right now is that, similar to, you know, how a mother who might have lost a child very early in life, they tend to want to, like, there are a lot of mothers who've had, unfortunately, perhaps a stillbirth, and they actually get, like, real looking dolls of babies in order to help ease that pain.
Yeah.
And for some it goes deeper than that. And potentially could lead to psychosis. For others, it's very therapeutic. But I'm wondering if this is the psychotic break of a mother.
What does the name of the show mean? If we bring it all the way back out to the name of the show and ask that question, like, what does that mean now? What does the name of the show mean? And, well, let me ask you this. Can we answer that question if it's a question that is being asked?
I kind of want to answer that with another question. Does it have a different meaning now than it did in the original series? Right?
Well, again, I don't think that they even answered I don't even think they put forth whether or not that was a question in the original series. I don't know if they have here either, but I feel like they've given us some more interesting things that we could maybe use to answer that, if that's what they're driving at. But I just don't hug me, I'm scared.
Who is scared? I guess that is the question, is right. Who is scared? And I guess in the original series, it was supposed to be us, the audience, or children, this idea of the target audience being children of the fake show. And now here, is it Leslie?
Let me put it this way. I've never heard someone say, "Don't hug me, I'm scared," but I have heard people say in real life and in movies, not to me, but just in general, like, you know, like, don't touch me. Like,
don't touch me. Yeah.
Like, don't touch me. But it's like normally in a moment where, like, they're super angry, and it's not like, they'll be like, "Hey, do you want a hug?" It's like, don't fucking touch me. Like, again, like, you've seen that in movies before where two characters interact in that way.
Right.
But, like, that's the only version of this that I've heard that comes close to "don't hug me, I'm scared." So what does that mean? Like, I don't know.
Perhaps, and this could be a stretch. I'm really trying.
Maybe what about mayhaps?
Mayhaps. I'll take mayhaps. A hug could be grounding. And if we're going to function under the lens of a mother having a psychotic break, would a hug break the illusion? Would it ground her back to reality? And she does not want that because reality is frightening. Being without child is frightening. Perhaps.
I mean, even without the kind of inclusion of, is there to answer the question that's harder to answer, which is who is the overarching person who created this? Mm-hmm. I think even without that, and like, could it be like specifically a grieving mother? I think it's just interesting because you said physical touch grounds us in reality. And so when someone says, "Don't hug me, I'm scared," it's like, okay, you don't want to be grounded in reality then. So that's
the first thing I can think of.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the literal interpretation, right? But if you take that and go with the meaning of why that happens, I don't know.
The only other thing I can think of is, don't hug me because I'm scared of what I will do if you touch me. That's the only other interpretation that's coming to mind, is like, if you get close to me, if you get within my personal space, I might act out without wanting to because I am scared. That is the only other thing, like somebody having, again, a psychotic episode, and like, you shouldn't get too close because you could get hurt, even though you might want to comfort them. They tell you, like, while I'm having this psychotic break, don't try to hug me, don't try to comfort me because I don't want to hurt you. I'm scared of hurting you.
Interesting.
Or maybe it doesn't even need to be a psychotic break. Maybe it's just somebody who's just afraid of letting people in.
I mean, again, I think they're all valid interpretations. Again, I go back to the question of, is there a question that is needing to be answered, right? Like,
I want to say yes, the same way that I'm over analyzing "You're Not My Real Son." Like, does that mean something? Is the same way that now I want to overanalyze the title. I feel like nothing is done without reason.
Agreed.
I feel everything in this show is symbolic. Everything in this show, it matters. Like, sure, there are a couple of throwaway gags that I think
they're always gonna be.
But at the same time, like, even like writing the silly symbols at the beginning of the episode, Yellow Guy like writing this down, being like, I have come up with I've been experimenting with a new language. And like, we sort of immediately threw that away as just, oh, that's just a weird thing that Yellow Guy is trying, and just to throw off Red Guy, and oh, whatever. But then it had a deeper meaning later on. It paid off later on. And so maybe that's what that was supposed to show, is like, don't discount anything at this point. Stay aware of all of the symbols you see. They might all mean something. They might all have a future meaning.
Same
with the shredder. The shredder we thought was a throwaway gag. And then what happens at the end of the episode?
Yeah, that's fair. I think maybe "Don't hug me, I'm scared" is not a question that needs to be answered. But I do think that the show gives you enough things that are needing to be answered, or will be answered if the show comes back. Like, what is the staircase? Like, who is Leslie, or what is their intent behind what they're doing? And also the book. Maybe the book will come back, maybe it won't, but there is a way in this narrative to answer the question of what is going on, because that book was the answer. So somebody understands what's happening here in this world because someone wrote it down. And it will be interesting to see if they ever return to that idea at any point in the show.
Is the book supposed to be the script?
That's what I don't know. We don't know that because, yeah, like you mentioned, we get back to the original point of the episode at the end, and Yellow Guy becomes an idiot again, or becomes Yellow Guy, however you want to interpret it.
The unenlightenment.
The unenlightenment happens. And look, like you said, everything happens in the show for a reason, and the creators of the show have very little time to get a whole lot across, and that is a hard ask to show and tell, but also show more than you're telling by giving away, hints and clues and foreshadowing. I think that, we have this ending the way it is, where he shreds the book. And I think that there are big questions left open, but I do think by the end of it, I feel like I have a pretty somewhat decent sense of what's going on and where they might go with the show moving forward. But I do think it's funny that the show brings it all the way back to the beginning at the end. Like, it's just right where it started again.
Right. Again, the cyclical nature of it. There was something really interesting about, so like, Leslie, obviously, as we said, gives Yellow Guy the book as like, these are your answers. Thank you for helping me tidy up my diorama, whatever the hell is actually supposed to mean. Because nothing was actually tidied up when he got downstairs, or was it? No, I guess it was. No, I guess it was. And she was saying that like just the lights needed to be fixed. And so he gets downstairs, the lights are then fixed because he brings the enlightenment with him, I suppose.
Guess so.
And then Duck, obviously being the shit that Duck is. I know you love Duck. I hate Duck.
Hey, Duck is the reason we don't know any answers.
I'm just saying, Stain Edwards, the Forever Boy, is a better Duck. But
that might be Duck.
I'm just saying.
That might be Duck. It could just also be Duck now.
I know.
There is a possibility that Duck was replaced in the second episode of the show.
But Yellow Guy obviously wants to show his friends this book to allow them to also achieve enlightenment, to understand their reality together, because they're the only other two he knows for a factor at his level of reality. And he wants to share that with him. And before he can, Duck, being the asshole that he is, rips out his batteries to give them back to Alec Tracy. Was that? Yeah, hell yeah. God, what a good name. And then, so obviously then, like, everything is fixed. Alec Tracy goes back to her little home, and thus the shredder is working. And Yellow Guy, being stupid once more, can't remember what the book was for, and proceeds to thoroughly enjoy shredding it, which, to be fair, it should not have fit in that shredder.
It's like a book. It's like a leather-bound tome.
But what was interesting, one, is that they show it being shredded, so that there is no question. Like, they give you like the glimpse, like through like the plastic window, to show it being shredded. I was trying so hard to see if there was anything to make out. I couldn't see anything. Maybe I'll take another look on when I watch it again, because I'm going to have to watch it again. But from there, it pans out to a wide shot of Yellow Guy maniacally laughing, shredding the answer to his reality. And as the camera pans out, it almost makes the room seem like a long hallway. The room is like morphing. I don't know if that was what that actually meant. That wide shot, was it just supposed to be ominous? Because it worked. I
don't know. Again, we've seen the house and we've seen the diorama that they're in, so it couldn't be that. But I don't know. Maybe it's supposed to be a literal interpretation of removing yourself from the reality of the show. Like, I don't know. They do things in this show where they're expecting you to understand what they're doing, and it's esoteric. So maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe it does. Like you said, the creators of this show, they do things with intent, but they also don't do certain things with intent as well.
Like, sometimes it's very clear that they are doing things to evoke a feeling. Mm-hmm. Really, for the most part, that's the gore. They want to evoke a feeling of unrest. And so that is the purpose of the gore, for the most part, is to evoke that feeling of unrest. And so I'm wondering if this like wide shot is supposed to just do the same, because it works.
Well, I don't think it leaves, I don't know, maybe it is an open-ended question for the end of the episode. I mean, there are plenty of questions that this episode does end up asking. Like, who is Leslie? Like, what is the reality? Who is controlling the reality? Is there someone controlling the reality?
Will we ever know what was in the book?
Right. Will we know what's in the book? What is the attic of this house? What does the attic having a door mean? What does that stained glass window mean, with them kind of represented on it, but not specifically them, or like, I guess kind of abstract ideas of what they are? Mm-hmm. Who made that? I mean, again, like, there are a lot of questions asked that are more about the reality and sub-realities of the show, but I'll tell you, I was not disappointed by the way this ended.
No, me neither. We were wondering, what kind of meta commentary were they going to do with this episode? We knew it was going to be something, and we were assuming it was going to have to set up season 2, and we were scared it wasn't going to be good, but it was. It was thought-provoking. We had plenty to talk about.
And then they give us some answers too. They don't not give you answers, that they just don't answer everything that you're asking, but they answer enough. I feel like
they answer enough to make you not feel frustrated.
But like any good show, they give you something else to chew on as well. They give like the shot of the door, like they and what is and who is Leslie, like, and the shot of the book. Like they give you some things where it's like, if there's a second season, which I hope there is. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, again, like the way they end it leaves it open, but do you want a second season?
Okay. To answer the first question of do I think there will be a second season, I think they set us up for it. And that was my concern. I mentioned this in a previous episode, that I wasn't sure if the art of like the cover art, the poster, I suppose, of the show itself, like having a big like 1 on it, which usually you don't always see unless if you know that there are other seasons currently in the works. Usually a show does not slap a big old number on their poster, because that gives expectations and you never know if something is going to be canceled. So they usually shy away from it unless if it is in production. But my fear is that they did that to set us up for something to be, cheeky about it. And so I assumed that there would be a second season, but I also was like, it could also just be a visual gag to make us think that there will be, set us up for that expectation, and then, destroy that expectation. But no, I think that they must be working on a second season. My then follow-up, do I want a second season? I have so many unanswered questions. I think I need a second season. And I fully trust them. I fully trust that it is going to be good.
Well, it'd at least be entertaining. I mean, that's the thing about this episode that we can't really stress enough, is there is plenty of what you would consider in other shows mythology in this episode, but the episode's also still entertaining. It still has an entertaining teacher that has a great song. They have some moments talking about that thing that they've learned about in the episode, but also there's plenty of the weird shit of them, seeing different versions of them, and Yellow Guy meeting the creator, or their creator possibly. Like that's all jammed into 22 minutes. Like
it felt short in a good way. Like when we saw like the halfway mark of the like the "Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared" like title card, basically, to like show that there's supposed to be a commercial in between. When that came up, I was like, oh my God, already? Like I was sad that we were already halfway through. It went very quickly, whereas like the family episode to me felt like it dragged. Like this, it was fast paced, but not in a way that felt bad. It felt earned. There was a lot going on, a lot to process, and you don't realize just how much time that was taking. And you were like, I was fully strapped in for the ride, and I was almost disappointed that this wasn't like a 40-minute special, because it felt like it almost should have been. Like I'm glad that it wasn't, because you never know like how would they fill all of that time, but I want more. It left me wanting more, and I knew that when we hit the halfway point.
I'm with you. I enjoyed it an immense amount. I have enjoyed watching this with you, obviously, but I have enjoyed the journey that the show has taken me on. And I think by the end of this, where we are now, kind of on the other side of the show, looking back on the last 6 episodes that we've done, I think these episodes are varying degrees of good to great and even amazing. I think the original run of the show is its own thing, and I would kind of be curious to go back and rewatch that with all of this kind of having been watched now. But I think they did a pretty good job of presenting something in these 6 episodes that is engaging and entertaining, but also thought-provoking and clearly very much a meta commentary on how we interact with the creations of other people, how the creators of those things interact with it, and how the creators interact with one another and the people. And I mean, they kind of touched on it a little bit, but not a lot, how the creators interact with the people that they're beholden to. So, I mean, it's all kind of there. Maybe it's not as perfectly laid out as some people would like, but David Lynch doesn't lay everything out for you. Stanley Kubrick didn't lay everything out for you. Some things you just have to take on faith or on your ability to comprehend what the artist is laying down, because some artists don't tell you. David Lynch never explains his movies because he feels like by him explaining it, that becomes the definitive explanation, and it discounts every other explanation or theory that anybody else ever had. And I'm totally with him because it does remove some of the joy and fun from consuming media and getting something personal out of it versus getting exactly what you're supposed to out of it, which in this day and age, with everything being so tailored for the mass consumer audience, it doesn't feel like anyone has anything thoughtful or personal to say anymore. Everything has to mean everything to everyone. And while that's fine, I think we live in a time and a place where there are plenty of voices out there that are able to be as loud as the rest with something interesting to say that they actually want you to sit and think about for more than 5 seconds, because now we're on to the next CGI thing we want to show you, or character cameo, or whatever the fuck. And that's now the expectation is a constant dopamine rush while watching a movie or a TV show. And I like that this show goes, we don't really need to do that. We can kind of hew closer to David Lynch or Stanley Kubrick or Jodorowsky or anyone who is making something that isn't just you look at it and go, I get it. It's asking more of the audience. And I appreciate something that asks the audience to be engaged throughout.
Yes, 110%. I am so glad that I was able to show you this series and then experience, this updated version firsthand with you. Like, this has been a long journey, and it's been an interesting journey since day one. And I'm so glad that the internet took to it the way that it did, because it encouraged them and gave them the budget to be able to make this. Because I can only assume that if you're releasing like 3-minute shorts on YouTube, it's because you don't have the budget at the time to make 20-minute episodes on a streaming platform. And so, it was a labor of love and an experiment, and the internet decided that it was good. And you don't always see that. A lot of good things tend to fizzle out and die, either due to YouTube's algorithm or just because of the fickleness of an audience. But I'm glad that this captured the attention and intrigue of so many people in order to give, the creators of the show the means to do something more with it. And I'm so glad I was able to share that with you, because this has been an amazing journey. I really hope they have a season 2.
Well, I mean, that's how I wanted to end this. So 2011 is when the show first came out. I was 21 at the time.
I was 14.
Then the second episode came out in 2014. I was 24 at the time. And now we're all the way in effectively 2022. So the newest version of the show came out in the last 6 months. That is over 11 years from the initial creation of this. The initial moment the show was released to the public, it's been over 11 years. So will it be another 5 years, like the last gap between the end of the first series and the pickup of the streaming series? I don't know if it'll be that long. I hope not. I hope that this opens up the door a lot quicker and a lot faster for the next season to come out within the next 2 to 3 years, as opposed to the next 5 to 6. But I think to your point, I mean, I'm glad that this exists at all. And the fact that we have 1 episode, let alone 9, or it's more than that, 6 plus 6, so 12. The fact that we have 12 episodes of this is nothing to sneeze at. So, do we need any more? I don't know. Would I like some more? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I really would.
Of all the things I saw last year, this was the biggest surprise, because again, I'd never heard of it, and it came in and was entertaining and fun in a way that these kinds of things tend not to be. And in a lot of ways, this felt like it was made by someone that I would totally get the references and the place that they're coming from and the things that they saw at a formative time in their life. They were watching similar things to what I was watching, because I was picking out references to 2001 and The Wicker Man and Zardoz and all kinds of things that are, again, not necessarily disparate places of influence, but definitely ones where it's a specific kind of thing. I mean, even down to, again, David Lynch. So, and look, this kind of show, like you said, sometimes it just doesn't resonate with the right people. This one thankfully did.
I'm so glad it did.
Yep, me too.
And I'm glad it resonated with you.
Yeah. I mean, I've been on board with this since we started watching it. You didn't have to do a whole lot of convincing after that first episode. So,
well, I'm glad that it was able to convince you to start SurrealTube as a series. And I mean, I feel like it's a hard act to follow.
It sure is. That for sure is the truth.
But there are so many cult classic, interesting, scary, disturbing online videos that I also still want to share with you, regardless of production value, just for the sake of culture at this point. I think the next one we're going to tackle, I think I'm going to show you Salad Fingers.
Which is another thing I haven't seen, but I know it doesn't have a TV show connected to it.
No, it is much older. I don't know if I'm sure it came out before the first Don't Have Me, I'm Scared. I am sure it must have. I think this was like Newgrounds, like animation.
Wow. Yeah, that's a long time ago.
Don't hold me to that. I have to do more research. I haven't done that yet. But I have seen that whole series the whole way through at least once. I think you have to see it at least once too.
I'm excited. I knew people in high school that watched it. So that's how, look, and I've been out of high school since 2008. So almost half of my life I've been out of high school. So at this point, like, I'm on board with whatever. These are things I have never seen. And if it was something that I had seen, maybe we wouldn't do it because, I don't know what I have to say about it. But at the same time, who knows if it's worth watching and talking about, I'm not going to say no. So
my favorite part, I think, of doing this is the theorizing and the what does it mean. I think when it comes to creepy things, not every creepy thing has to have a deep meaning behind it, but I always wonder where that inspiration is and what does it represent. And I think Salad Fingers definitely has that. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to hear what you think of it. I'm excited to hear your theories of it. But that being said, Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared has been a wild ride, and I hope it's not over.
Same. No, for sure. This was a good series to start off the show with. I'm sure, my hope is we'll be able to check back in with it in the future at some point. There's no news right now about a second season of the show, but, hey, God willing, we'll get something. So,
yeah.
So until the next time we do SurrealTube together, which will be sooner rather than later, you can find Emma and I over at weirdingwaymedia.com, which is the network that we've created for all the shows that we work on both together and separately. So that's where you can go to find this show, Scary Stories We Tell. That is this show, so I don't know what I'm mentioning it for. Twisted and Uncorked, The Projection Booth, Dark Destinations, Filmentuaries, The Feminine Critique. All those shows can be found over at weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, Scary Stories We Tell, Scary Stories WT on all social media. Big thanks as always to Maggie the Odd and Dustin Rutledge for the album artwork, and to Alex Malnack of Blondo for the music. You can find him over on Spotify. Just search Blondo, or if you live in the Omaha area, you can go see him live, and you totally should. Maggie. Jesus Christ, I already mentioned Maggie the Odd. Emma, thank you so much, as always, for programming this series, because it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
I'm so glad.
And as always, we'll let our good friend, the former host of Sightings, Mr. Tim White, lead us out.
No mystery is closed to an open mind.